Welcome to Fast Tip Friday. This is Amy Bowser-Rollins with Litigation Support Guru. In today's tip, I want to show you how I quickly format an Excel workbook to print. So the first step I do is, once I open the workbook, is I check to see how many tabs or worksheets there are. So in this case, there's 3. The next thing I do is I check to see if there's any freeze panes turned on. So in this case, I see some lines here, so I'm pretty sure that freeze panes is turned on in 2 directions. So if I click down a few rows, you'll see that freeze panes is turned on at row 8. And then also if I click to the right, you'll see that column A is turned on. So I just want to get a feel for what formatting the workbook already has and where I might need to make adjustments. So the next thing I might do is make sure that all the data is visible. So this workbook doesn't have a lot of text in one cell because it's numbers, but if there were columns that had text, I would consider whether or not to increase or decrease the column width, and then potentially even turn on wrap text, so that it would wrap the text in a cell, and the more you can wrap text, the more you can decrease the column width, especially if you're trying to fit something on the page. So in this case, it's just numbers, so I don't need to do that, but I wanted to go through all the steps that I would take. Another consideration I would normally have is I would decide whether I want all the data in the cells to be top or bottom aligned. So in this case, it's bottom aligned, and depending on the data that's in the cells, it might look better for all of the cells to be top aligned. In this case, we have this 8-row header that needs to be bottom aligned, so it looks good. But I could change the alignment for the rest of the data if it made sense. Again, these are numbers, so it doesn't make sense. So next thing I would do is go to File, Print, and just get a feel for what it would look like to print right off the bat without making any changes. So for instance, how many pages is it? Looks like it's 105, which is a lot. Another thing I would look for is to see if it has any existing headers and footers, which it doesn't. So then let's go back. I would also go to the View tab and go into Page Break Preview, so that I can see where it's going to break the pages as of right now. Like this right here is not good. And then I would potentially scroll through to see if anything's different than what it is above. And then I always make sure I at least go to the end too. So this right here is problematic because there's a total right here that's landing on a page by itself. So I wouldn't want that to happen. So we can make adjustments here. We can drag and drop page breaks, but we're not ready to do that. So I just want to get a feel for where the page breaks are occurring. And we'll switch back to normal view. The next thing I would do is go to the Page Layout tab, and then I would start making adjustments. So one of the adjustments I make is I go to Margins, and I choose Narrow. Now later on you might need to adjust it even more, but this really does make it narrow margins, and usually that's pretty good. Does a pretty good job. The next thing I would do is change the orientation to landscape if I need to. So in this case, I'm trying to fit a bunch of columns on the page, and I don't want it to get cut off. When we went to Print Preview, we could see it was cutting it off. That's why it was 105 pages. So I'm going to switch it to landscape. And a lot of times I do switch it to landscape, because usually I'm trying to squeeze it on as least amount of pages as possible. For size, I would leave it letter if I can, but sometimes in the legal industry, I'm trying to squeeze spreadsheets as much as I can, and I have to just print them on legal size paper. Usually the attorney doesn't mind as long as they can read everything. The next thing I might do is check to see right here the width and the height. So a lot of times I automatically change this to 1 page, which means that I want everything to be squeezed on the page, on 1 page widthwise. So all of this, it would automatically adjust it down so that it fits on one page width. I leave the height automatic so it can be as many pages as it needs to be. And then I would go to grid lines. It may have borders. This one doesn't, but if it does have borders, then I won't need to print grid lines. But I think it's easier to read on the printed copy if there's lines on the page. So like this is the grid lines turned on with view. And a lot of times you'll get spreadsheets where it's white like this because somebody's formatted it that way. So if you want the grid lines while you're staring at the workbook, you can turn that on. But I almost always turn on print grid lines because I think, like I said, when you're trying to find a certain cell, it's easier if you have lines to follow. Sometimes, depending on the usage, and in this case, in Jeff's article, he's getting it ready for trial, so he definitely wanted to turn on headings, and so I'll turn them on for now. So if you print the headings, it'll print the A, B, C, D, and the 1, 2, 3, and that way, if you're directing a witness, like in Jeff's example, you can say go to, H14, and they'll be able to do that because it'll be on the printed page. Okay, so the next thing I would do is go to print titles. This dialog box is page setup. So the first thing, it's on the sheet tab by default when it comes in here. So I would check to see if there's a print area. And if I click on this, you'll see there's a print area just on that small section. And most likely I'm going to want to print the whole thing. So I would take out the print area. And then rows to repeat at the top when it's printed. So we already saw that freeze panes was turned on. And so we should most likely print it the same way that the freeze panes are turned on. So that would mean that we want to repeat these 8 rows on every page. Oops. Okay, and then columns to repeat at the left. In this case, freeze panes was turned on for column A, so I'd probably do that. So now we have rows 1 to 8 and column A repeating on every page. It's already taken into account our grid lines and our column headings, our row and column headings. This is another option that I would consider depending on what type of data it is, and that is, do we want page 2 to be a continuation to the right or down? So if I wanted the printed copy to go across and then continue going across, then I would choose over then down instead of down then over. But that depends on what the data is on the spreadsheet. All right, so I might go to page and make sure that it has the settings I've already set, or you can set them here. This is where you change landscape and you can put it on one page. Margins, same thing, we already chose narrow, but I also like this option down here to center on the page. So instead of everything being shoved over to the left and at the top, you could choose horizontal, and then it would center everything on the page. Then I would go to header footer, I would go into custom header, and a lot of times I'm typing the name of the spreadsheet in this section. So if there was a name in the header at the top here, or if there was a header that had a name, it would come in here already. But usually it's helpful for the attorneys if they can see the name on the top printed in the header. But in this case, Jeff's example is it's a trial exhibit, and in his example he thought it was a good idea to put the Bates number, and I agree. So you can format it any way you want. I'm just going to leave it alone for now. So we click OK, and then in the custom footer, similar to what Jeff said, he suggested maybe doing the tab name. And that would be good if it was an exhibit, a trial exhibit, because the Bates number would be in the header and then the tab would be helpful. But in my case, a lot of times I'm using the file name and the tab name. So when the attorney asks me to print such and such file, it'll have the file name with the XLS extension in the footer so they can confirm that that's the document they printed at one time. And then sometimes people put the page number centered. I tend to put it over to the right because sometimes the file and tab name can come over a little bit into the center. So for here, we're going to put the page number and we're going to put the total pages, which is really helpful. So we're going to type PAGE space. We're going to click on page. Then we're going to do space of space. And then we're going to click on pages. And then we're going to click OK. And then we're going to click OK. And then we're going to go to File, Print. And our document's looking pretty good. We've got the file name and the tab. We've got the page number. We've got our rows and column headings. And it's now down to 34 pages, which is much more reasonable. Like Jeff said, I agree. I've done this as well. Switch to Adobe PDF and print it to a PDF and then print the PDF to the printer. That way you have a PDF that you can quality check. We're going to choose print entire workbook because that would be what you would do if it was a trial exhibit. And then some of the other settings that Jeff made, I've already made in a different way, so those are done. So we're going to click print, and I'll just save it with the same name. And then the PDF, what I do is once I print it to a PDF, I sort of flip through to make sure everything looks good. So I might just scroll through the pages, make sure that nothing unexpected happens. And remember that at the end of the document we had that number right here, so we need to make sure that turned out okay. So it did. And then the other two worksheets are these graphs. So everything looks really good. At this point, I would just print this PDF and I'd be good to go. I hope you can put this tip to good use.